pleasure to join.
1 second, Raz. Okay. So, Raz, I want to introduce you to our viewers. Dr. Raz Zimmt is an expert on Iran from the Israeli INSS. Is also one of the members of our network who has been with us for quite a while. This is not our first webinar with us. And the topic today, before Raz takes over, is obviously the tensions that are going and I would say boiling between Israel and Iran after Iran's missile strike that was launched last week and the impending Israeli response. So, Raz, with this kind of a short introduction, I leave it to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aaron. It's always a pleasure to join Wikistrat webinars. I'll try to be brief to leave more time for Q&As. I would have to open up with one remark. I think we have to be very cautious and very modest. We always have to be modest, but especially today, due to the fact that, as the title of this webinar says, we're still in the eye of the storm. We're still in the middle of this ongoing ping pong game between Iran and Israel. We still have to see and to wait and see what kind of Israeli retaliation we will see in the next few days, probably to the Iranian missiles attack of October the 1st. We still don't know what kind of attack we will see, what are the consequences of this attack, and then what the Iranian response to the Israeli response is going to be. So I'll try to come up with a few scenarios, but then say a few things about the way I think the recent developments between Iran and Israel impact Iran's security strategy, because I think regardless of what's going to happen in the next few days, those developments will certainly have some impact on the security strategy of Iran. But I'll start with the Israeli possible response, and I have to emphasize that I have no clue what this response is going to look like. But the fact that we are already 2 weeks after the Iranian attack clearly shows the complexity of the decisions inside Israel, how exactly to react in a way which, on the one hand, show its commitment to respond to Iranian attack, certainly due to the fact that it was widespread, more effective, even in comparison to the recent Iranian attack of April the 13th. But on the other hand, my sense is that there is still quite some kind of hesitation from the Israeli point of view, how to react to the Iranian attack in a way which will not open up a third full-scale confrontation in addition to the one in Gaza and the second one in Lebanon. And of course, in addition to that, Israel has to take into consideration the US position, certainly right now, ahead of the US elections. So I think that the bottom line is that Israel will have to choose from within, I would say, 4 families of targets, of possible targets. The first option is to concentrate on what can be referred to as military targets, air defense, missiles, production as well. So that's one kind of possible targets. Israel can certainly decide to choose. The second kind the second option is what is referred to as symbols of the Iranian regime. I don't know exactly what should be considered as symbols of the Iranian regime, whether the headquarters of the Iranian military forces should be considered a military target or a symbol of the regime. Perhaps there are other symbols of the regime which could be targeted by Israel. But anyway, this is the second family of targets if you'd like. The third option is Iranian infrastructures, mostly connected to energy, oil, gas. And the fourth option is the nuclear facilities. Again, I have no idea what kind of Israeli response we will see, but my sense, according to different reports published in the last few days, both in Israel and the United States, seem to indicate that there are some attempts by the United States to restrain the Israeli response in a way which will lead Israel to choose from the first or second families of targets, meaning at least as the first reaction to the Iranian missile attack, not to target neither nuclear facilities nor energy related facilities. But that has to, we still have to wait and see. And we also have to take into consideration the fact that this is not the end of the story. Even if Israel decides to restrain itself in a way and limit its attack only on military targets, we still don't know what the Iranian response will be. And if the Iranian response will be at least as harsh as we saw 2 weeks ago, that could lead to further escalation and to Israeli decision to move forward to the next family of targets. From the Iranian point of view, and I've been following the Iranian reactions over the last 2 weeks, I think that we can certainly see 2 or 3 main things the Iranians have been doing over the 2 last weeks. First, as expected, Iranian threats. We've heard Iranian officials, both Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi, commander of the IRGC Air Force, saying Iran has responded in 2 weeks ago to the assassination of Nasrallah and the high-ranking IRGC commander. If Israel decides to react, we will do the same. This will not be the end of the story. We have to take those threats quite seriously. I think it's very unlikely to presume that if Israel decides to retaliate, even if it's only against military targets, it's very unlikely, in my view, that Iran will not retaliate. There was a single report published a few days ago in Sharq al-Awsat in London, saying that Iran, in a way, relates some messages implying that if Israel decides to attack certain military targets, low-profile military targets, perhaps this would give an opportunity to Iran to refrain from escalation. But I'm not sure if we should consider this report as serious. So threatening voices from Iran is the first thing we've seen. The second thing we've seen is a kind of diplomatic efforts from Iran to try and restrain Israel, both in its context with Western countries, but mostly regional countries. And I think what we've seen over the last week, mainly Foreign Minister Arakchi visits to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to Oman. He is going to visit Egypt as well, probably in the next few days, not just to try and relay some messages of restraint to Israel, but also possibly to make sure that Israel is not going to be able to use Iran's neighbors in order to attack Israel, to attack Iran, sorry, from those countries. Again, we still have to see whether those diplomatic efforts are going to be successful. Last but not least, when it comes to what Iran has been doing, is we've had some reports about actions taken by Iran to somehow minimize the impact of possible Israeli retaliation. For example, there was one report saying that oil production has dropped a little bit in certain oil production areas inside Iran, mostly near the Persian Gulf, anticipating Israeli possible attack against its oil installations. So that's one of the things we've seen as Iranian preparation for an Israeli attack. I think again that that perhaps more important than to discuss what kind of attack we're going to see in the next few days from Israel, and then what kind of response we will see from Iran, but we can certainly discuss it further in the Q&A, is to discuss a little bit what I consider to be a major impact on the recent developments in the region on the Iran's security strategy. And I think that overall, I would say that the three main components of the Iran's security strategy, which is proxies, its strategic capabilities, and its nuclear program, will have to be reassessed by Iran following the recent developments, mostly in Lebanon and between Israel and Lebanon. And I will say just a few words about each of those components, and again, we can elaborate on them later. Starting with the proxies, I think that the whole concept of proxies has faced major challenges over the last year since the beginning of the war in Gaza, and I think we discussed it in previous webinars as well. I think that for the first time, the Gaza war provided Iran with an opportunity to use this strategy of the unification of the fronts against Israel by using its proxies, mostly Hezbollah and the Houthis and pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, against Israel in a very coordinated effort. And it was quite successful in a way. But the bottom line was that all those efforts did not succeed in forcing Israel into accepting a ceasefire, neither in Gaza, certainly not in Lebanon. And I think what we've seen over the last few weeks, especially following the assassinations of most Hezbollah leadership in Beirut, is that this strategy of proxies in a way failed to achieve its main objective from the Iranian point of view. Because we have to remember that the use of proxies by Iran meant to help Iran carry out its and achieve its objectives vis-a-vis its rivals in the region, mostly Israel, in a way which would maintain its ability to keep the war away as possible from Iran. It was the proxies which have to serve Iranian interests rather than Iran has to serve the proxies' interests. And what happened over the last few weeks or months is that Iran has faced a very peculiar situation in which not only Iran cannot cannot achieve its objectives through the use of proxies, and it is losing the strategic capabilities of at least two of its main proxies. One is Hamas, and then of course Hezbollah, which has always been the strategic arm of Iran. But the problem is that instead of helping Iran to achieve its objectives, now those proxies are more requiring the support and the need from Iran itself. So there is no doubt, in my view, that in the day after this war, or in the next few weeks and months, Iran will have to reassess this conception of the proxies and ask itself whether it's as beneficial as it wanted it to be. And now, again, I'm not saying that Iran is going to stop supporting Hezbollah. We already see some reports saying that the IRGC is involved in measures to come up and support Hezbollah following the loss of its leadership. Iran is certainly going to help rehabilitate Hezbollah's capabilities as much as possible. We've seen visits by both Arakchi and also Ghalibaf, the speaker of the Majlis, a few days ago inside Beirut, saying again and again Iran will support the so-called resistance and Hezbollah anyway. But, and this is a very big but, I'm not sure that Iran will be as committed to this strategy of proxies as it used to be before the lessons learned in the last few weeks and months. So this is one component of Iran's security strategy, which will have to be reassessed by Iran. The second component has been the use and the development and use of the strategic capabilities of Iran, mostly its missiles and its drones. And here I have to say, on the one hand, you can certainly see a kind of Iranian a sense that both attacks against Israel, both the April attack against Israel and certainly the recent attack on October the 1st were considered by Iran as success. I would even say that while the attack in April, in my view, was considered by Iran as a tactical failure, because most of the projectiles were intercepted by Israel, but as a strategic success, because of the fact that it was the first time Iran, despite all the threats not to do that, managed to launch more than 300 projectiles against Israel. This time, in October the 1st, my sense is that Iran considers that not just as a strategic success, but also as a tactical success, because they have certainly learned some lessons from the previous attack, and we can certainly see an improvement in the way Iran has managed to hit some targets inside Israel. Having said that, the bottom line is still that Iran has not managed to force the so-called new equation against Israel, which meant to deter Israel from attacking Iranian and Hezbollah targets, both in Lebanon and certainly in Iran. And the fact that it's very likely that we will see an Israeli retaliation over the next few days is a very good example for Iran that despite the use of hundreds of ballistic missiles against Iran, Iran is still suffering from strategic lack of ability to deal with Israel technological and aerial and intelligence capabilities, and Iran has not been able to prevent Israel from continuing its efforts, not just in Gaza and Lebanon, but also against Iran, which brings me to the third component of Iran's security strategy, and that has been the nuclear issue. And as some of you probably know, we are facing right now a new wave of, I would say, discourse inside Iran over the question whether the lessons learned by Iran over the last few weeks and months, meaning that they can no longer use the proxies the way they used the proxies before Israel's attacks, mostly against Hezbollah. And the fact that despite the improvement made by Iran when it comes to its strategic military capabilities, missiles and drones, despite that, due to the fact that Iran can no longer guarantee its deterrence vis-a-vis Israel through the use of those two components, there are more and more voices inside Iran about the possibility of changing the so-called nuclear doctrine in Iran. Some of you might have seen the recent reports a few days ago about 40 members of the Iranian parliament, the Iranian Majlis, sending a letter to the SNSC, the Supreme National Security Council in Iran, demanding to reassess and reconsider Iran's defense strategy. There are voices even from within the more pragmatic and reformist camp in Iran suggesting that Iran will no longer be able to use its position as a threshold state and might have to reconsider the possibility of weaponization. And again, I'm not saying that we are likely to see a strategic decision made by Supreme Leader Khamenei in the next few days or weeks, considering the weaponization, but this is certainly on the table. And I think that what we see in the open sources about these discussions going on in Iran over the possibility of weaponization and no longer be able to use only the threshold position, this has been a major development over the last year, and certainly in light of the ongoing escalation between Israel and Iran. And this is something the Iranians are certainly going to reassess in the next few weeks. So to sum up, I think that regardless of what we will see in the next few days and the way Israel is going to retaliate, I think that in any case, even if we manage somehow to close this cycle of violence between Israel and Iran until the next time, this will certainly give some major reason for the Iranian leadership to reconsider its strategy. And I think this is a new and very risky and very dangerous phase in the Israeli-Iranian confrontation. I said in April, back in April, after the Iranian first attack, that this is a new phase in the strategic confrontation between Israel and Iran. Even when Iran decided not to retaliate to the Israeli minor retaliation to this first attack, I said that regardless of what happened in April, this option of Iranian missiles attack against Israel is now on the table. They could use it in the future, and unfortunately, as we saw in October, they used that when they reached the conclusion that they have to preserve the deterrence following the assassination of both Nasrallah and the Iranian Quds commander in Lebanon. I think I will stop here, and we can elaborate on those issues in the Q&As.
Thank you, Raz. Fascinating introduction. The first question is actually more, I want to go a little bit back. When Iran launched their missile attack, which is, as you said, one of their strategic capabilities, how much of that capacity were they using? There were about 200 missiles used, and I heard different numbers that was like 10% to 20% of their capacity, which means they're quite limited. A lot of them kind of failed to launch. A lot of them were intercepted. Can you a little bit explain and elaborate about, in terms of what is the Iranian capability when it comes to their missile and their drones capabilities when they have, which they have?
Yeah, so this is a very good question, and I of course I have to base my answer only on open sources, which I'm not sure if they're accurate. But according to most open sources, we're talking about a few thousands of ballistic missiles, about 3,000 missiles, which could be used by Iran. And here I think there are three main questions to consider. One is whether this information is accurate, and whether they really have about 300 missiles. If they do, then you can reduce from this
3,000, you mean?
3,000, sorry.
Yeah.
If you reduce from this number the 200 or 300 being used this time, and then about 100 and something in April, you can reach the number of something between 2,500 to 3,000. But this is only one issue we have to take into consideration. The second issue is that we are not sure about Iran's capability to produce further missiles. So even if they already used a few hundred missiles against Israel in the two attacks, we don't know whether they were already able to compensate for those missiles since April, certainly since October. I'm not sure, by the way. A third question, actually I have four questions. The third question is whether the Israeli possible attack against Israel would target missiles production facilities, which could certainly have an impact on the capability of Iran to launch further missiles in the future. And the last and very important issue from the Israeli point of view is whether Israel has the capability and the ammunition and the defense capabilities to deal with those thousands of Iranian missiles. I don't have the answer for that, but I think that in any kind of Israeli retaliation, we will have to take into consideration not just Iran's attacking capabilities, but also the Israeli defensive capabilities, which is also very important.
One of the opinions that I'm getting quite a lot is that this is the from Israelis, Israeli experts, is that this is the best opportunity Israel will have to strike against Iran's nuclear program. That this is a window of opportunity because of the situation with Hezbollah and Hamas in this north and south, i.e. the proxies, because of the readiness and level of defense and the fact that Israel is already in a state of war. So it's not something that we'll have to pull it back into a state of war, but it's already in it. Because it has shown that it has a capability, and because Iran will probably learn more lessons and improve capabilities. So hence, they're only going to get better to do it now than later, and so on. How much do you think this consideration of this window of opportunity, plus US elections, domestic politics, and so on, how much do you think that is a consideration pushing or being pushed by the hawk, so to speak, in Israel to target Iranian nuclear sites? And how much do you think is that going to be something that we're likely to see in the near, let's say in the near future, even after this retaliation attack? How much do you think is that going to be in the near future something that Israel may be promoting and pushing towards attacking the Iranian nuclear sites in the upcoming months or even year?
So my sense is that there is a growing consensus in Israel that Iran's nuclear program has to be dealt with. Certainly in light of two things. One is the fact that Iran has become a nuclear threshold state. The fact that it's going to be almost impossible to reach any kind of settlement, diplomatic settlement between Iran and the international community in the foreseeable future. The Iranians themselves have said again and again that the JCPOA is dead. So the most optimistic scenario would be less for less, some kind of sanctions relief in exchange for some kind of, I wouldn't even say rolling back, but perhaps some kind of agreement from the Iranian side to lower the enrichment level or to stop enrichment at under 60% or so. So I think that there are certainly growing voices inside Israel that a military solution will probably be necessary at some stage. I think that the major question right now, in addition, of course, to the U.S. position, which has to be taken into consideration by Israel, but we will probably see in the next few weeks what's going on in the United States and who is going to be the next president, and whether Israel should be more optimistic or more pessimistic concerning the possibility of certain cooperation with the United States, with the next administration in the States against Iran's nuclear facilities, against the Iranian nuclear program. I think that the major question right now is whether we should use this opportunity right now to launch an attack against the nuclear facilities, not just because of the fact that we are in the midst of escalation with the Iranians, but also due to the fact that one of the reasons which was suggested in the past, I personally didn't think that it was the major reason not to do that, but one of the reasons proposed in the past by some Israelis against attacking Iran's nuclear facilities was that the reaction through Hezbollah would lead to a full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah. And right now we are, of course, in a very different situation. But I have to say that first, as I said before, my sense is that Israel is certainly going to take into consideration, at least in the next few weeks, the US position. And therefore, I will be quite surprised to see, at least in the next stage of Israeli response against Iran, an Israeli attack against nuclear facilities. I think that if we reach a further escalation with Iran after the Israeli initial response, it might lead us to Israeli attack infrastructure, that then perhaps even some nuclear facilities, but we are not yet there. My personal view, and I'm not sure it's the same as the decision makers in Israel, is that any kind of Israeli attack against nuclear facilities in Iran have to take into consideration not just the US position and the probability of further escalation between Israel and Iran or with Hezbollah, but two major questions. One is whether Israel on its own can inflict significant damage to the nuclear facilities inside Iran. By the way, not just Natanz, but also Fordo, which is of course much more, much less vulnerable to Israeli military attacks. Whether the impact of such Israeli attack without the US will be enough to delay Iran's nuclear program by more than, I would say, 1 year, for example. And the second question we have to ask ourselves is how Iran is going to retaliate, not in the military side, but in its decision what to do with its nuclear program. So if an Israeli attack, for example, against Natanz, will lead to a delay of 8 to 12 months in Iran's nuclear program, but we might see Iran making a decision to enrich uranium to 90%, to withdraw from the NPT, to weaponize, this is a possibility which has to be taken into consideration by Israel, and therefore I think it's a very complex decision to be made by Israel. And despite the growing voices inside Israel to use this as an opportunity, I'm not sure that the current circumstances encourage such an attack. But again, we might be in a different situation after the elections in the United States, regardless of who is going to be the next president.
You mentioned about the voices that are increasing in Iran about maybe the change in the nuclear strategy from a threshold country to a nuclear country, i.e. North Korean style kind of a scenario. It sounds to me like, based on what you just said about the Iranian nuclear program at best being postponed but not eliminated, it sounds to me that the ball of whether or not to go nuclear is in the hands of the Iranian leadership. What is stopping them from going from a threshold to a full nuclear country? One, and two, what could be one of the actions that can be taken, which is non-military, in order to stop them from going full nuclear in one of those situations, such as an attack or a decision by the leadership? So what is stopping them and what can stop them in the future?
Yeah, so I think a major constraint still exists in Iran is the fact that Iran realizes and thinks that a decision to weaponize and to break out will probably mean military response either by Israel or even worse, from the United States. And the only positive thing you can say about Supreme Leader Khamenei is that he usually was quite cautious. But I have to say that some decisions made by Iran over the last few months, mostly its decision to attack Israel both in April and October, could serve as a possible evidence that there is a limit to this cautiousness of Iran's supreme leader. They are ready to take risks. But again, I think that it's very clear for the Iranians that they will not be able to hide the decision to weaponize, especially after the exposure of Israeli intelligence penetration to both Hezbollah and Iran. And therefore, I think that some elements within the Iranian leadership, perhaps including Supreme Leader Khamenei, are still constrained by the possibility that a decision to break out will mean a military attack against Iran, perhaps even from the United States. I'm not sure that they're as concerned as they used to be in the past, but this is still a calculation they have to take. By the way, as some of you probably know, over the last few months, there have been some reports about certain activities within Iran's nuclear program, which could testify as a proof that something has happened in Iran's nuclear program. My sense is that they are trying to make sure that if a strategic decision to break out is made by the Supreme Leader, by Khamenei, it will not take them more than a year or so to reach nuclear military capabilities, but less than that. So they might want to limit the breakout time if required. But still, a decision to break out was not yet made, at least in our view. What to do? If you would ask me 2 or 3 years ago, I would say a return to the JCPOA would probably be the best scenario to limit or to delay Iran's nuclear program more than any other scenario. But as I said, I think it's very unlikely to presume that there is going to be any kind of new agreement reached between Iran and the international community, between Iran and the United States and the EU, certainly until October 2025, where the snapback mechanism is going to be over. And therefore, I think that the most we can get from any kind of agreement or diplomatic efforts between Iran and the United States is, as I said before, some kind of sanctions relief in return for some kind of rolling back its capabilities. And I think that at this stage, we have to get a very credible threat, mostly from the United States, and I hope it will be made very publicly by either Trump or Harris, to make sure that Iran realizes that the meaning of a decision by the Iranian leadership to break out equals military response by the United States. By the way, some would say, especially in Israel, I know, don't trust the US. They will not be able to threat the Iranians in a very satisfactory way. I think that one of the main reasons Iran still hasn't made a decision, not just to break out, but even to enrich uranium to 90%, is because they reached the conclusion that the US is quite serious in its position that Iran should not do that. But again, we are facing a new administration anyway, and I think this will have to be made very clear by the Americans what will be the consequences of an Iranian decision to do that.
One of the things that is being discussed a lot is the vulnerability of the Iranian regime internally, and that an attack by Israel might be considered to be something the regime considered to be a threat to their stability and a threat to their own regime. How much is the regime's stability at risk from these tensions between Israel and Iran? How much do you think does that play in the calculation of either side when they're thinking of the potential actions that they take?
So there have usually been two different approaches to this question. One is that an Israeli attack against Iran, and especially an attack against Iranian infrastructures inside Iran, would result in rallying around the flag, rallying the Iranian people around the flag. The other position was that due to the crisis of legitimacy faced by the Iranian regime, any kind of Israeli attack would be even encouraged by the Iranian people. My sense is that it will probably do both. So meaning the base of the Iranian regime, which in my view is not more than 20 or 25% of the Iranian population, will probably rally around the flag, especially in case of Israeli attack against Iran. Then we will certainly find some Iranians hoping for the opportunity to use an Israeli attack in order to make the Iranian regime weaker and use that as an opportunity to perhaps to carry out some kind of protests against the Iranian regime. But I think that the majority of the Iranians will probably do what they are doing right now, which is actually not a lot, and I think that since the repression of the Mahsa Amini's protest in Iran in early 2023, we have not seen a real, certainly not immediate threat or challenge to the stability of the Iranian regime. And I certainly don't think that the majority of the Iranian population will use an Israeli attack in order to express their dissatisfaction with the Iranian with the policy of the Iranian regime or the Iranian regime. I'm quite concerned with the possibility that an Israeli attack, especially if it targets civilian infrastructure, will be used by the Iranian regime to even increase its repression and its securitization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But basically, I think we'll probably see no major impact of an Israeli attack. Some would perhaps encourage that. Others would be very dissatisfied with that. I think that the average Iranian, if you could speak about an average Iranian, would probably be dissatisfied with an Israeli attack on major infrastructure against Iran, mainly because of the level of patriotic senses inside Iran, and we saw that before. On the other side, if Israel attacks specific military targets, IRGC targets, symbols of the regime, those elements within the Iranian societies which are more critical about with the regime are probably going to say, well, that's not too bad.
You mentioned about the Iranian security strategy based on the proxies, based on the strategic capabilities and the strategic missiles drones and the nuclear program. I want to go for a second to the proxies. It seems the proxies program collapsed. Essentially, the Hamas in the south and in Lebanon, Hezbollah. What's going to be the implications of that on Iranian security strategy when it comes to the region? I mean, are they going to invest more in rebuilding Hezbollah? Are they going to try to find an alternative to Hezbollah, maybe in Syria? Are they going to try to rebuild Hamas in Lebanon, as some of our experts maybe have suggested? What are going to be the implications of those two proxies essentially being neutralized, and how is that going to impact Iran's decisions?
So we have to separate between Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas, with all due respect, is not as important as Hezbollah. In a way, Hamas is dispensable. I think Hamas is important because this was a major tool by Iran to encircle Israel, not just from the north and the east, but also from the south, from Gaza. But I think that what happened over the last year showed us that Iran is capable of preserving its influence in the region, even without Hamas ruling and strategic capabilities in Gaza. We've already seen efforts made by Iran to try and compensate for the possible loss of Hamas, mainly through the West Bank. We've seen more and more efforts by Iran to use Jordan as a way to deliver weapons to the West Bank and support terrorist infrastructures in the West Bank, for example, in Jenin. I'm not sure it's going to be as successful as in Gaza due to the constraints and the level of Israeli security domination in the West Bank. But Hamas is something which Iran can handle without. Again, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Hamas has been quite important for Iran to preserve its involvement in the Palestinian arena, but it's certainly not as important as Hezbollah. Hezbollah, for years, was the main project by Iran, and it was aimed not just to be engaged against Israel in order to engage Israel in a way of attrition war, but also as a main deterrence capability against Israel in order to deter Israel from attacking Iran's nuclear capabilities. And therefore, the loss of Hezbollah, or at least the major damages caused to its military leadership and capabilities over the last few weeks, is a major blow to Iran. I think there is no doubt that Iran will try in the day after the war in Lebanon to try and rehabilitate the capabilities of Hezbollah, and therefore I think that it's going to be very important for Israel to insist not only on what Hezbollah can do in the southern part of Lebanon, but also how to limit, I wouldn't say eliminate because it's impossible to eliminate, but at least to limit the way Iran can support and can deliver weapons to Hezbollah through the Lebanese-Syrian border. But I think again that it's still early to say. I'm not certain that Iran has reached the conclusion that it has lost the Hezbollah project. I think that there are still those in Iran who might think that despite the blows inflicted on Hezbollah, it's still possible to rehabilitate Hezbollah. But I think we will have to see not just what the military consequences of the war are going to be, but how those military successes of Israel are going to be translated into some kind of diplomatic, political settlement, which will make it more difficult for Iran to maintain its influence in Lebanon and to maintain its support for Hezbollah.
With the current situation of Hezbollah losing the leadership and with Israeli ground troops underground in Lebanon facing surprisingly quite little encounter with enemy on the ground itself, how much do you think is Iran pushing for the continuation of the situation, i.e. continuation of the war, versus pushing for a resolution and the end of the fighting in South Lebanon?
Yeah, that's one of the major questions we are asking ourselves in the last few weeks. Whether Iran and whether the efforts we've seen, especially by Iran's foreign minister and Ismail Qani, the commander of the Quds Force, are aimed to reach a kind of a ceasefire, which will at least allow Iran in the future to rehabilitate Hezbollah, or to do the other thing, which is to drag Israel into an ongoing war of attrition, which will change the balance of power between Israel and Hezbollah. Because right now, if the war ceases, on the one hand, one can say, well, this is the peak of Israeli success against Hezbollah. Hezbollah is still being unable to recover from the major blows by Israel. On the other hand, one could say if this war continues, we might find ourselves in a situation in which Hezbollah can try to begin the recovery of its capabilities, perhaps with the assistance of Iran, and Israel will be stuck in a kind of ongoing war. Israeli citizens are not going to be able to go back to the north. Israelis all over Israel, certainly from Tel Aviv to the north, are going to be under continued threat Iran, of Hezbollah missiles and rockets. So it's very difficult to say what is the Iranian assessment right now, whether they think that a ceasefire is beneficial because it will stop this process of Israel's efforts against Hezbollah, or Iran would actually try to lengthen this war in order to give more opportunities for Hezbollah to drag Israel into a war of attrition. I think another question related is whether Iran is ready, and of course it's also a decision to be made by Hezbollah, but right now my sense is that most decisions are going to be made by Tehran, not by Beirut, because of the lack of leadership in Hezbollah, whether Iran is going to be ready to give up this linkage between what's going on in Gaza and what's going on in Lebanon. And that's a good question. We've had different reports of different kinds of approaches in Iran, whether they are ready to do that or not. I think it's too early to say. It will probably take some few more weeks in order to find out what is the Iranian approach right now following those blows against Hezbollah.
With the demise of Hezbollah and its current state, how much is Iran involved, or how much is Iran putting effort to reinforce the others, let's say, parts of the axis that they have created, i.e. the militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and so on? Are we seeing Iran basically kind of re-engaging them in terms of replacing Hezbollah, at least temporarily, or are we seeing them as trying to moderate and to kind of balance them from escalating the situation to a regional conflict, considering that they are also attacking sea lanes when it comes to the Houthis, or US bases when it comes to the militias in Iraq?
I have to say that actually I was quite surprised with the fact that we haven't seen more attempts by the Houthis and the Iraqi militias to try and help Hezbollah by increasing their involvement against Israel. We have seen some efforts by the Iraqi pro-Iranian militias and by the Houthis, but not to the extent I would perhaps expect. The question is whether this has to do with an Iranian directive saying, look, we are already losing Hezbollah and we might lose Hamas as well. So we have to preserve other proxies, mostly the Houthis and the Iraqi militias, in order to still maintain some kind of, at least some of this network of Iranian partners and proxies in the region. Another explanation could be that the Houthis and the Iraqi militias have their own agendas. It's certainly right about the Houthis. The Houthis, we know that they have not been that disciplined, and therefore I think it's probably a combination between an Iranian decision to maintain some of its capabilities of this axis against Israel to be used perhaps in the future, and the fact that all the members of this so-called axis of resistance have reached the conclusion that there is a limit to what they can do in order to compensate for the losses of Hezbollah. But I have to say, we did anticipate perhaps more involvement by those militias in case of a full-scale confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah. But we have also to admit that and I don't want to say that we are not facing a major challenge still by Hezbollah against Israel, but it is certainly less than most assessments concerning Hezbollah's capability, and it probably has to do with the preemptive Israeli measures taken in the last few weeks and months against the missiles and rockets capabilities and drones capabilities in Lebanon.
We're reaching the end. I want to ask you more of a general question, which is, from the events that took place in the last few weeks, What was the one that surprised you the most, that you did not anticipate or expect, and kind of surprised you?
I was surprised with the fact that Iran did not retaliate to the killing of Hania and Fuad Shukr. I thought that following the April attack, after the assassination of Mahdavi in Damascus, they will not be able to restrain themselves from attacking Israel after the killing of Hania and Fuad Shukr. And we know, again, even if based only on open sources, that there was already a decision made by Supreme Leader Khamenei to retaliate to the killing of both Hania and Fuad Shukr. And eventually he decided not to do that or to postpone it. It actually reached the point where Hezbollah was so disappointed from the fact that Iran was not ready to join this retaliation, that Hezbollah had to do that by itself. And so I think that was a surprise, and I can give some explanations to that, either the fact that there was a new government in Iran, the fact that Hania was not an Iranian official being killed by Israel, the fact that they perhaps thought that it would be beneficial not to attack Israel in order to contribute to ceasefire in Gaza. But at the end of the day, this was something surprise. But I think that this decision to retaliate to the killing of Nasrallah and the Iranian high-ranking commander of the IRGC was again a proof that even though they have not reacted to the killing of Hania and Shukr, they're still ready to make a very risky decisions in order to make sure that their deterrence vis-a-vis Israel is at least somehow preserved.
Okay, I think this is a great remark to kind of conclude this webinar. I want to thank you, Raz, for joining us today. I want to thank everybody who joined us today as well and logged in to listen to Raz and to participate in this Q&A. It was indeed fascinating. I do want to remind you all that this is part of a series of webinars that we are conducting, between 2 or 3 of those every month. So please stay tuned for more. And I also want to remind you that recently, with the invitation to this webinar, we have republished a report that we have actually submitted in January of 2022, which is called "When Israel Strikes Iran." And this is a report where we actually did run a simulation about potential scenarios, and how would that situation could evolve. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you.